I'm Charlie Redding,
And I'm Claire Fudge.
and this is the TRIBEathlon podcast.
The quote that I live by is basics done well.
That was Tom Evans, and this episode is Army to Ultra. Tom Evans, a former British Army captain, first made his mark on the ultra running world in 2017 when he came third in the 251-kilometre desert ultra marathon des Sables, the infamous MDS. Despite entering on the back of a bet with a friend, his third place finish was the best result any European had ever achieved in the history of the race. Tom then astounded once again in 2018 when he won the 101-kilometre CCC race at the Ultra-Trail du Mont-Blanc, the UTMB, the principle of an incredibly successful racing year, which also saw him take the top spot and break course records at the Coastal Challenge Costa Rica and the South Downs Way 50. Since then, he's podiumed at the two most iconic trail races in the world, the Western States and the UTMB. So he has achieved a huge amount in the world of ultra trail running in what is a really very short time in the sport. So Claire and I wanted to chat to him about how his time in the army has helped him plan and execute races so effectively, how he focuses on tracking down the marginal gains, and what data he does and doesn't find valuable in recovering from these monumental 100-mile runs. I know you are going to absolutely love this interview with the legend that is Tom Evans. 33 Fuel produce award-winning natural sports nutrition, and everything they do is led by their philosophy for performance, for health, and for a fitter future. 33 Fuel's awesome products have been fueling triathletes worldwide since 2012, as well as many of the world's best athletes. So from the England football team to Tour de France winners and triathlon world champions, including 4 times Ironman world champ Chrissie Wellington, who's been using 33 Fuel for years. 33 Fuel also leads sports nutrition sustainability with plant-focused formulas for reduced environmental impact, recyclable packaging, and carbon-neutral delivery on all orders, which also got them rated as by Runners World as one of the top 50 eco-hero companies worldwide. Another reason why I love what Warren and Erica are doing at 33 Fuel. So to find out more about 33 Fuel, go to 33fuel.com, and if you use the code TRIBEathlon or click the link in the show notes, you'll get an extra special discount when you purchase your amazing stock of 33 Fuel. So Tom, welcome to the TRIBEathlon podcast. Really looking forward to chatting. I've been looking forward to getting you on this podcast for a while, so looking forward to talking all things ultra running. I want to kick off, though, by you telling us the story of how you found your way into ultra running, because I think it's an important place to start.
Yeah, definitely. Well, firstly, Charlie, thanks for having me. And I feel honoured to be on the pod. So I left school at 18 after my A-levels, and I then joined the British Army, went to Sandhurst, and then commissioned into the Welsh Guards in 2012. I think growing up through school, I was always very sporty, and wasn't necessarily the best at anything, but I definitely tried the hardest. And in hindsight, I always looked like I was far better than I was because I would score the winning goal in the last minute, or I'd make a try-saving tack on rugby pitch. And the more I think about it now, it wasn't because I was better or I could read the game better. I was just fitter than everyone else. And I performed significantly better in the final phase of a team sports environment. Then joined the army, and I was fit in the army and really enjoyed sort of the long, slow elements of the training, especially sort of uneven terrain in the mountains. And yeah, I had some friends who did Marathon des Sables, which is a 250-kilometer multi-stage self-supported race across part of the Sahara Desert in Morocco. So temperatures up to sort of 45 degrees, but freezing at night, and sandstorms and all sorts. And yeah, I had friends did it in 2016, loved it and did really well, finished in the top 300 out of 2,000. And yeah, after they got back, went to the pub as you do, couple of beers, and yeah, I bet them rather foolishly and probably rather arrogantly that having never done anything like this before, that I could finish better than they did. So fast forward 12 months, I didn't have a coach. I didn't necessarily have a particularly detailed training plan. I knew that I needed to do some training. I knew I needed to do some heat prep, but it was kind of a throw mud at the wall and see what sticks. And yeah, it went better than I could ever have imagined. And yeah, fast forward to 18 months from there, I left the British Army and became a full-time professional ultra distance trail runner, which I still sort of have to pinch myself because it seems fairly mad.
And what a great thing to describe as your job or career or whatever, however you want to describe it. It's a super cool thing to be. Tell me, like, the number of times I've heard people in the ultra running world say that Marathon des Sables got them started. What is it about that race that kind of A, brings people in from outside, and B, converts them into absolute ultra running addicts?
I think great question. I think for me, ultra running itself and trail running is the epitome of grassroots participation and elite performance thrown into one. Like, if I compare it to the triathlon equivalent of Kona, great, you want to race Kona, but no matter who you are, you're not unless you're a pro, you're not lining up on the same start line as Jan Frodeno, Christian Blumenfeld, Lucy Charles Barkley. You're not doing it. You might be in the age group race, but you're racing against your peers. Whereas with a race like Marathon des Sables or any ultra distance trail racing, you are on the same start line at exactly the same time, in exactly the same race, exactly the same conditions, all going through it together. And I think because Marathon des Sables is a 6-day, 5-stage, multi-stage race, you do become this tribe. You do become this bizarre community in the middle of the desert where you've got no mobile phone signal. So you have to be there all together. You carry everything. So you've not got a book that you can go off and read because you're not carrying it. So yeah, I think a lot of people do it. It is documented as being one of the harder ones. I think the faster you go, the easier it is in the race. So in my opinion, for me, it's not the hardest ultra race in the world. But I think if you are a mid to backpacker fighting against cutoff times, it is absolutely nails. Just insanely difficult. Yeah, I'd take my hat off to the people who are. Yeah, it's far more impressive to finish last at Marathon des Sables than it is to finish first.
Do you think your background in the forces has kind of put you in a really good position, not only from an endurance perspective in terms of mindset as like an ultra runner, but for that first race that you did, or that first ultra race that you did really well in, being out in the desert, I presume you'd been in those kind of conditions before in terms of training. Did that put you in a really good place, I guess, for getting through that race?
Yeah, I think so. Great question, Claire. I think that where I think it sets you apart is, yeah, you're just ready to embrace the challenge, and you know that it's going to be hard. And you just put one foot in front of the other, and in that sense, I think you break down a lot of the barriers that people find scary, because it is quite a scary thing to do. It's far more expeditionary than it is out and out performance. I think because it wasn't second nature in the military, but it was a known entity for me. It's been something that I'd done before. I didn't mind sleeping outside without a comfortable bed. I'm not very good at many things, but sleeping is one of them that I am exceptional at. I could sleep anywhere, anytime. It's one of my very, very few skills. That and latte art are they're my hidden talents.
Sleeping's a good skill to have, though.
I think so. I think and especially in somewhere like the desert where it's not that easy to sleep. I think that makes a huge difference. But yeah, I think there's obviously a lot of very obvious military things that helped: the mentality, the base level endurance. But yeah, I think because Marathon Sub is of an expeditionary nature, it just becomes second nature, I think.
And so how did Marathon des Sables go? I mean, so obviously it went well, but how did it go from that to deciding, right, I am going to take up this professionally and I'm going to, drop out of the army and do it all?
Yeah, so I am a bit of a yes man. I hate to say no. And I just because the Marathon des Sables was part of what was at the time called the Ultra-Trail World Tour, similar to WTCS, I guess, for ultra running. And I was then invited to a 100-kilometer mountain race that I had absolutely no right to be at, having never run in the mountains before. But I was invited and I wanted to do it and said, why not? So kind of a fairly similar approach. I did some training, but not particularly structured, and then went out to Switzerland 2 weeks before the race and then ran in the mountains, completely fell in love with it and raced, and fortunate enough to finish on the podium. And after that point, I was then ranked fourth overall in the Ultra Trail World Tour. Having never done anything, because it's 3 races that count, but because I'd finished third and fourth in 2 races, I was fourth overall. So I was then invited to another race and finished on the podium again, and ended up finishing third overall in the World Series in my first year. That got that was in 2017, and at that point, sort of, it wouldn't have been financially viable I didn't have the opportunities to be able to leave and turn full time. These things take a bit more time, and you don't want to just be sort of a one trick pony with 1 or 2 good races. You need to sort of keep stringing them together. And at that point, the army said, look, we see the value in you doing this. But because ultra running isn't an Olympic sport, we can't just sign you off and like they do with some triathletes or rugby players. And it's
like Cat Matthews,
for example. But what the army did for me is they kind of said, look, we can't do this officially, but we can do it unofficially. But you might get called in you might still have to pick up some crap jobs at work, but you probably won't. But maybe you probably need to be in camp once or twice a week. And I was based in Purbright, just outside Guildford. So actually, it was fine to train on the North Downs. It was great. And so that was fine. And and then from there, I had a really good 2018, medaled at the World Championships, won a couple of big races. And at that point I then had the offers that I could turn full time. So I handed in my notice to the military sort of mid to end of August in 2018. Then left the military 1st of July 2019. Had a bit of racing in the rest of 2019 and very early 2020, and here comes the pandemic. So you're sort of thinking, oh my God, what do I do? And then end of the pandemic, as races were starting to happen again, I then have a career-threatening injury. And then I'm really thinking, oh my gosh, I've made the wrong decision. I'm about to be a full-time athlete, but not professional because I can't make a living. And yes, that was pretty worrying. But no, for me, it was 100% the right decision.
Brilliant. And like being somebody that knows a bit about the world of ultra running, having interviewed ultra runners but not knowing loads about it. The two most iconic races that I always hear about are Western States and UTMB, and you've podiumed at both of those, I believe. Tell me a bit about both of those. You know, getting to the podium on those. I mean, even getting into Western States, I understand, is an absolute nightmare. So tell us about podiuming at both of those, and also comparing the two, because essentially one is the US equivalent of the European, isn't it? So tell us a bit about those two results and how they felt and how they compared.
Yeah, of course. I guess sort of putting them into a triathlon perspective, Western States is probably Kona. It's pretty difficult to get in, not massive amounts of people on the start line, but it's really, really prestigious. UTMB is probably the Xterra version. It's mountainous. There probably aren't that many people who have won both, and certainly not in a short period of time, because the skill sets and the requirements are different. They're both about the same distance, but Western States so about 100 miles, but Western States will take 14 and a bit hours. UTMB will take 20 and a bit hours. So UTMB is the same distance, but quarter of the time, or a third of the time, even more. Western States is a quarter of the time less than UTMB. Western States it's the original 100-mile race. 1 year, a US guy decided it was a horse race. And then this guy Gordy, who's the founder of the race, decided, actually this year I'm going to try and run it and see if I can run 100 miles on the Western States Trail in less than 24 hours. And he did it in like 23:45 or something very close. And then since then, the race has been run every year, minus COVID. And yeah, which I think is pretty incredible. And for me, I love the history with it. It's so random, but so calculated at the same time, which I think makes it really pure. And then UTMB, I guess, it's a bit more commercial. It's in Chamonix. It's 105, 106 miles with 10,000 meters of climbing, so like 35,000 feet of climbing. Starts at 6 p.m, so you run through the night. It's wild. And I did Western States my first time in 2019, and then UTMB exactly 12 months after knee surgery last year, so in 2022.
Sorry, go on, Claire.
Now, I was just going to ask about how you adapt your nutrition and your hydration around sort of being at altitude, being at sea level, different environments. Because you've raced so many distances and done so well at lots of multiple kind of distances. How do you change things, if you do change things, for altitude and heat and changes in environment?
I think I should probably break it down into sort of I have three different blocks for each race. Mm-hmm. So the first block is sort of a foundation. It basically improve everything. Let's shift everything to the right. So if you look on the classic sports physiology graph, mm-hmm. LT1, LT2, I just want to try and shift everything a tiny bit across, because is it that specific? No, but it will help because it then transcends into efficiency and economy, and mm-hmm. economy is key. Other numbers in ultra running don't really matter, but if you can have the biggest economy on the start line, it's not going to guarantee that you win because there are far more factors, but it's going to put you physically in the best place you can possibly be. My second phase, it will then be sort of the baseline specificity. So combining a little, still trying to shift LT1, LT2 and get as physiologically as good as I can get, and sort of try and optimize there while then adding in some specificity still. So still hard workouts, but if I'm training for a mountain race, in the mountains, or if I'm training for a hot race, in the heat. And then the third and final block, I'll typically do at altitude, no matter what the race is. I like altitude. I respond pretty well to altitude and kind of feel like I've got a good, it's a well calculated approach. I understand what I need to do, how I can prepare best for it, and then when to race afterwards. And that's then the most specific time. So a lot of the intensity gets pulled out of my training, and I do far more easy running with once every 10 days, a bit of a sharpener to keep a little bit of leg turnover. But yeah, the majority is then just becomes incredibly specific. So if I'm training for a mountain race, I'll go out to the mountains, I'll do lots of hiking, I'll be using poles, making sure that I nail my nutrition, trying to consume as many carbohydrates as possible per hour, and making sure that I'm doing that right. Or it's getting my kit sorted. It's controlling all of the controllables, I guess, in that element. Or if I'm training for a fast race, it's lots of long tempos, practicing nutrition. That's the sort of the phase that I enjoy the most. But it's hard because you're getting closer to race day, but you're training super high volume because, in my opinion, you need to at that stage for that specificity, because you can still make those adaptations with your blood plasma, your mitochondria density, whereas with other things it takes a little bit more time to change. So I think that's how I would plan everything out.
That sounds amazing. And I also love the fact, actually, listening to you speaking on other podcasts and things, actually, how simplistic you like to keep things as well. It's keeping the specificity there, but actually being quite simple about things, not overcomplicating things, but having kind of that structure and routine, which is it sounds good.
I also think in this planning there is your army background coming out as well, isn't there? I've heard you refer in other interviews to wargaming and kind of planning and executing strategies. What have you taken from your army days in terms of planning and executing the race?
Yeah, I think good question. I think for me, it's really important. In a sport like ultra running, there are so many uncontrollable factors that you can't do anything about. But at the same time, there are lots of things that you can control. Or at least if you can't control fully, you're able to have a bit of a say in it. A good sort of army phrase is no plan survives contact. So as soon as the enemy start firing, your plan just goes completely out the window, but you still know what you need to do and what you need to achieve. It might look a little bit different on the ground, but you know what you've got to do. And I think for me, that's really important, that I know what I need to do going into the race. I can prepare as much for everything as I possibly can. And then come race day, when the gun goes off and things go out the window, I still know what I need to achieve. Great. I need to consume 100 grams of carbohydrate an hour because that is what I've prepared for. But my stomach stops playing ball, and I start feeling sick, or I get an upset stomach, or whatever it is. Okay, that's great. You still need to consume 100 grams of carbohydrate. Doesn't matter how you're going to do it. Yes, you are planning on using Morton and Red Bull, but now you can't do that because something's gone wrong. So deal with the problem, but you know how to deal with it because you know what the end state needs to be.
I think that's a brilliant lesson, isn't it? You're controlling the controllables, but you're very outcome driven and saying, this is what we were going to get to. Therefore, we might have to change how we get there, but we are still going to get there. And is that partly, I know when I messaged Shane Benzie, one of the former guests on the podcast, who I know you've worked with in the past, and he said about the fact that you were very good at trusting the process and generating the outcome. What are your thoughts around that subject?
Yeah, I think it's a difficult one. I think, yes, do trust the process, but my process is my process, and my process isn't the process for everyone. So I guess I'd say I've sort of slightly adapted the trust the process to trust your process. Find a way that works for you. Me training 26 to 30 hours a week is my process. That doesn't work for 99% of people. I can't try and follow someone else's process. So I think, yeah, trust your process, and it becomes difficult. And it's the answer that no one likes. Well, the answer that everyone gives, but no one likes to hear, because there is no one size fits all. There is no golden handshake that, oh, you do this on the start line, or you do this one session in training, you're going to be great. There's just nothing. So for me, it's I'll sit down at the beginning of the year, or when I'm planning my season, I'll sit down with the team around me, not just my coach, but my psychologist, my nutritionist, my agent, and we will figure out, right, what is possible this year, or what do I want to achieve this year? Cool. I want to race I want to race, let's take this year, for example, Western States and the Bob Graham Round. For me, that's what I want to do this year. Okay, cool. And then we'll then say, okay, well, we'll then take a step backwards and say, right, in order to race these two things run these two things at your best ability, what do we need to do? Where do numbers need to be? And you can then take that further and say, right, in order to get to the start line, we need to, for Western States, for example, great, we need to be super efficient, and then we need to improve efficiency by X%. Great. Nutrition. Last year, I was consuming 90 grams of carbohydrate a year. This year, my goal is to get to be able to consuming 100 grams of carbohydrate per year. Great. How am I going to do that? Can I do that on my own? No. Well, who can I use to do that? Who is the best nutrition company? Who is the best nutritionist? Who is the team who are going to allow me to achieve this so I can achieve that? And I just break it down, and I don't just work with one coach. I work with 15 different people, all in their different fields, from Shane Benzie, who is a movement coach, to a sleep coach, to a psychologist, to strength and conditioning, to nutrition, to all of my other partners. And it's everyone working together in order to achieve that goal that, for me, I can't do that on my own. So I need as much help as I possibly can. And with that help, it turn sort of, hopefully, dream into reality.
Brilliant. And obviously all of this planning is really brilliant, but you've also got to turn up at the time. When you get to the start line, you've actually got to be able to turn up and race the best race you can. It sounds to me like you're looking for all the marginal gains possible with all of the different experts that are helping you. But have you got any advice for people that you can give that is about how you can kind of make sure that you execute that plan at the time?
Yeah, I think, there are just so many uncontrollable factors in racing. If you can control the controllables in your training, and if you set yourself a goal, firstly, for the races, is your goal to finish, let's say it's to finish UTMB. Okay, cool. That's great. Brilliant goal. I'd probably make it a little bit more specific. Right, I want to do UTMB in less than 24 hours, or less than 30 hours, let's say. Okay, well, what does that mean? Okay, well, I need to get to Courmayeur, I need to get to the halfway point in 13 hours because I know I'm going to slow down. Okay, well, what do I need to do in order to be able to do that? When you sort of break down, okay, well, there's climbing. So I need to improve my climbing ability in order to do that. Right, how am I going to do that? Oh, training. I need to maybe add a little bit more climbing into my training. How much climbing is there at the UTMB course? 10,000 meters. Okay, and it's 100 miles long. Yeah. So for every 100, you might say something like, right, for every 100 miles in training that I run, I want to climb 10,000 meters, for example. And you can just play it out like that. So you then know when you're then stood on the start line, right, you have that self-confidence because you know deep down that you have done absolutely everything you possibly could do in order to give yourself the best chance of achieving that goal. But if you take away the first step and you don't set yourself a clear goal, what are you training for? Oh, I'm training for UTMB. What specifically are you training for at UTMB? For me, it's so important. Some people probably say, oh, well, that takes the fun out of it because trail running is supposed to be super relaxed and not stressful. And for me, it's not. It becomes not stressful at all. Yes, it's probably a bit more stressful in the training, but I then come to the racing part, the bit that is the important phase, in my opinion, and I'm not at all stressed. I'm so relaxed because I know that I have made all the mistakes I'm going to make in training, and I'm 100% ready for the race to come.
I think this is brilliant advice. I think this is exactly what I talk to people about when planning around business, because creating specific or smart goals around each of the different elements puts you in a much stronger position to achieve them, but also, as you say, gives you confidence on the start line to actually execute. So yeah, I think that's really, really interesting. You mentioned within that the Bob Graham round. Now, the Bob Graham round is, of course, fell running, which is kind of very similar to trail running, but different. And that, I know, is one of your goals for this year. Tell me a bit about how, in your mind, the Bob Graham round sits compared to your more traditional ultra running background, and why it appeals to you so much, and what are your goals for the Bob Graham?
So the Bob Graham round is, I guess, in my eyes, it is the original ultra endurance running test, physical and mental test, in the Lake District, stacked and heaped full of history. And for me, it is epitomizing grassroots with top level performance. And yeah, growing up, I knew about the Bob Graham round, and I'd read about it, and I'd read about Billy Bland, and I was like, how can there still be a record from 1982 that's still here today? And you sort of look back and you see how many people and how many incredible athletes have attempted to try and break the record and have just got nowhere near it, until fairly recently with two athletes, Killian and Jack, breaking it. And you just think, geez, if Billy Bland was doing it now, I dread to think how quick he would run. But for me, it's really exciting, and being based in living in the UK and being based in the UK, being my home, I want to show a light on the incredible heritage and the incredible history of British endurance. And I think there definitely is, from the fell running community, there definitely is a little bit of not looking down on trail running, but trail running isn't as difficult as fell running. So for me, I am doing quite a bit of fell running this year to try and show that actually I can mix it in a bit of everything. And I want to get that local support. I want to be involved in the community as much as I possibly can. because for me, doing the Bob Graham round isn't about breaking records. Yes, I'd love to set the record for the round, but for me, it's not about that. It's about the whole process, and it's about being involved in the community and telling that story and showing that sort of that deep, rich history of the Lake District and of incredible levels of endurance performance. And yeah, for me, it's incredibly inspiring, and I've not really done a proper project before. So yeah, this will be a first, and what better place to do your plan and execute your first project than from home. Which is really exciting.
Brilliant. And is there a plan to go and do the Charlie Ramsey and the Paddy Buckley as well at some point?
Yeah, definitely. It's just all about trying to fit these things in. I'd love to be doing one every weekend, but I think one, I think I'd have a divorce, and then two, I'm not sure. I just wouldn't be able to race. And at the moment, I'm very, very focused on racing, rather than the FKTs and the challenges. Yeah, for me, the racing has got to come first, and the challenges and the Bob Graham round sadly has to take a bit of a backseat so I can race. Because when I then attempt these the rounds and the challenges, I want to have a good following, because I want to be able to show more people. Not that I'm doing it. Yeah, I'm not doing it. Yes, I'm obviously slightly doing it for myself because I want to see how much I can push myself. But the more people I can get to follow along for the journey, the more people understand how incredible the Lake District is. And you can really sort of show a great light on, actually, I live in the UK. The trail running and the racing in the UK is so bad. There's no, why would I stay in the UK? I just want to go away. And for me, it's like, well, I can drive there. I can run in my opinion, some of the best trails in the world and some of the most beautiful, spectacular scenery, and with some of the nicest people. It's a lot better than going to France. So yeah, for me, it's just incredible.
Particularly now that you have this shiny new camper van that we're looking at you sat in.
Yeah, precisely. So me and Karen the camper and the dogs are going to be exploring the Lake District lot. So no, really exciting.
And I understood listening to another podcast you're on, actually, that you started to do a lot more cooking in lockdown. So is that going to be a feature in the new camper van as well?
Yeah, definitely. I'm not sure what the first thing I'll cook. I'm away this weekend in the camper van, so we'll see. I think the first few times it will probably be, I like preparing food, so I would probably prepared everything. It'll just be heating it up again. But no, I'm really excited. Again, definitely bring a different element to training, and it can be a little bit more resourceful and just recover a little bit better in and around training. Which is really exciting.
I've got this.
Not sure I'll be making pasta in here though.
I've got this vision of, I remember seeing Nikki Spinks when she did, I think it was the Bob Graham double, and she comes up to the camper van that they've parked somewhere along on the route, and she sits down in a little deck chair and eats fish and chips before carrying on. I've sort of got this being created.
That sounds like what Nikki would do anyway.
It was either fish and chips or rice pudding or baked beans on toast, I think was her nutrition for the Bob Graham.
Perfect. It doesn't need to be any more complicated than that.
No, exactly. Now you mentioned within that Killian taking the record for the Bob Graham, which he's now lost. I've just finished reading Above the Clouds, and he is quite an incredible guy, isn't he, in terms of all of the different aspects. What do you make of, obviously having raced against him, he won UTMB as you finished third. What do you make of him in the sport?
I think what he has done is he has mastered the sport. He has got the best understanding of the sport itself. He will know everyone who is competing. He will know every challenge that will face him in every race, and can just prepare better than anyone else because he understands the sport. He is the master of the sport. And I think, yeah, for me, that's incredibly inspiring. He has dedicated so much time and effort, not just to the physical element of the training, but in the more conceptual side. And he is incredibly intelligent and trains not just crazy hard, but he trains incredibly smartly. That then allows him to put in these incredibly big performances on all sorts of races, sort of from UTMB to Ciesanal, and yeah, it's just, yeah, it is incredibly inspiring. And yeah, being able to race with him and be competitive is just a complete dream come true.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, I just love the way his whole focus is around the mountains, isn't it? And it's just kind of different sports through the mountains. One of the things I remember hearing you say was after one of your races, you got ill. I think it was after UTMB, you got ill. I know that I am subject to getting ill after Ironmans or after the few ultras that I've done. Do you find that you're prone to getting ill after big races still, or was that just a one-off?
I guess it depends what the race is. Normally after a race is yes, because that's sort of the final day of my training, and I then kind of switch off and become a normal human being for a couple of weeks afterwards. So everything kind of goes out the window. I stopped taking my supplements. I don't eat as well. I probably don't hydrate as much. Whereas I know that if I give myself 3-4 days of still being strict with nutrition after a race, I won't get ill. Mm-hmm. But sometimes I've just put so much effort into a build up that I stop enjoying it. And so I'd rather get ill and take all the pressure off myself. And you may get ill, you may not. But yeah, it definitely impacts you. And so for me, I know that after a B race, call it, I know that I need to still be even if I want to pig out on bad food or whatever it is, I still need to get all the basic things done. I need to eat really well. I need to sleep really well. I need to hydrate really well. If I'm flying, I need to make sure I fly well. And yeah, it can be a huge factor, but I think it's fairly easy to mitigate that if you can be bothered. And sometimes 90% of the time I can be bothered, but when I don't, I'm the one who's got to deal with it, and I kind of know it's going to happen, but I put my hands up. Yeah, I'm responsible. If it happens, it happens. I'll suck it up when it happens if it does. But sometimes life's a bit too short for to worry about. Yeah, taking your vitamin C, your zinc, and your iron 2 days after you've run for 20 hours in the race that meant everything to you for that year, and actually you just want to be a normal human and go out and drink flat whites and eat almond croissant.
What do you tend to do, or how much time do you have as like your downtime or recovery or cross training, sort of like after big races or in between races? Like what does that look like in terms of recovery times?
For a B race, pretty much nothing. Probably a day or two of nothing, and then cross training for a couple of days, but running within a week. But for an A race, for every hour that I race, will be days off running. 3 weeks of no running. afterwards. But I raced 3 weeks ago, just over 3 weeks ago now in the US, an 100K race on the Saturday, and I then ran on the Monday afterwards. Not because it was particularly planned, but I felt okay. So I didn't miss anything. And it was probably in hindsight, it was probably a bit too soon, but touch wood, I've sort of got through it and haven't picked up any niggles and have just managed to, get some consistent training back, and raced 2 days ago as well. But in a 10K cross country race that went well. So I've obviously well recovered. But it's just about being sensible and listening to your body. And I think a lot of time it's very easy to get pretty head up in wearable technology. And if whatever you're wearing, your Whoop band or your Aura ring isn't saying that you've recovered, then you haven't recovered. Or people saying, oh yeah, my HRV was wrong. I can, within 3 minutes of being awake, I can completely manipulate my HRV from one reading that makes it look like I'm not recovered at all to do some breathing exercises and I'm 100% recovered. So I think it's more about listening to your body than it is about listening to what your HRV is. And I think I definitely have some time for heart rate variability, but for me, it is by far the least important metric when it comes to, if I was to stop, I don't measure heart rate variability. I measure everything else, but I wouldn't. Heart rate variability is a fad, in my opinion.
Well, that's interesting. What's the one figure that you hold with the most importance then?
For recovery, I'll get my bloods tested 2 weeks after, just to make sure what's going on. And sort of in that, probably the most important one is creatine kinase levels, to make sure that the muscles have sort of rebound themselves. Because when you get DOMs, so these tiny microscopic tears in your muscle fiber, what happens is your creatine kinase can leak out of that and go into your bloodstream, that then makes your liver and kidneys have to work far harder, meaning that you're not processing everything that you should be and you're not recovering. So if your creatine kinase levels are at baseline, then you know you've recovered well. So before I get back into hard training, I'll always do a blood test that I pay for, because I think it's really important to make sure that levels are back to normal and there's nothing going on that you necessarily don't feel. But I think, honestly, I track everything sort of numbers wise, and I fill in a sheet on my phone every morning. But the most important metric is how I feel between 1 and 10.
I think that's a really important point that you bring in, actually, and you've mentioned it right at the very beginning about, it's, I can't remember the exact words you used, but it's your planning, your preparation, and actually, it is individual. And I'm a great believer actually in kind of theory versus practice, and you've got to take that athlete or that person and see how they kind of recover. So it's really interesting to hear. We've talked before, haven't we, Charlie, on the podcast about kind of wearable technologies, and different people have sort of different ideas on it, and it's really interesting to kind of hear your take on it in terms of, which I think is great, in terms of listen to your body. Yes, there's metrics, listen to your body, and there's some things that you take, such as blood biomarkers, that actually really help you to recover. So it's really good to hear that side of kind of the very practical kind of nature to it as well, and simplistic nature to it actually as well.
Yeah, I think it's super important. There are far too many overcomplicated things in life, and people sometimes end up not doing their run sessions because they're too complicated. Whereas for me, I would rather things, yes, we do some complicated things, but I'd rather it be simple, easy to understand, easy to digest, and it then becomes far easier to go out and do it or measure it or whatever it is. So that's not a barrier to performance at all.
Brilliant. Excellent. Now, obviously, ultra running has risen in popularity massively over the last few years. I'm not entirely sure. I think it's coming into the Olympics, isn't it? But it was. I read an article that it said it was, and then I couldn't find any follow up to that. So, do you think it will appear in the Olympics? Because I'm not sure that there's any certainty around it.
It is my understanding at the moment that it is not being. It's definitely not at Paris. I think it will eventually become an Olympic sport. That is because it is growing so quickly, and in my opinion, it ticks all of the Olympic spirit bullet points that you need to hit for it to be a sport. I think where ultra running has traditionally stumbled a little bit is because it's a commercial sport. There is no overarching governing body. The governing bodies, or the people who are closest to governing bodies, are businesses who want to make as much money as possible and grow the sport as much as possible so they can make more money. And for them, who am I to say that's right or wrong? I'm incredibly fortunate that I'm a professional athlete in this sport and I can make a good living out of it. But because there is no national governing body, it's very difficult to decide what sort of race would you do? Would you do a UTMB, a mountain 100-mile race that one person might win? Would you do a hilly 50-kilometer race that a completely different athlete would win? Or would you do 100 kilometers on the track? And because ultra running is such a diverse sport. Ultra running, who is a better ultra runner? A 50-kilometer road ultra runner or a 100-mile mountain runner? Because there's no definition of it. So in the Trail Running World Championships, I think there are 7 different races, so that you can have 7 Trail Running World Champions, or 14 because male and female, and it's just it's very difficult because there's so much. It's great because there's so much inclusion, there's so many different distances, so more people can take part, but at the same time it then becomes really difficult to narrow it down into one event or 2 events perhaps.
Yeah, I can see that, but equally you're absolutely right in that it feels to me like it should be an Olympic sport, but you're right, in what
I agree
is the difficult question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, maybe they'd introduce a relay to make it fun to watch, like they have in triathlon.
But that's what. So you look at a race like the cross country championships, whether it's world cross or European cross country, and you could take a course like that. You could do a 10-kilometer course, and I think there are definitely fun ways that you could get people to watch it. But it would just be the viewability of it becomes a little bit more difficult. It's not like bike racing that you can just have motorbikes going up and down. But having said that, at races like UTMB, they now do an incredible job at filming 90% of the race. So never say never. Do I think it will happen? Yes. Will it happen in my racing career? I wouldn't have thought so, but if it did, it would be something that I would be excited about.
Brilliant. Excellent. Now we get everyone that comes on the podcast to talk about books. So are there any particular books that you found particularly inspiring, particularly helpful, you find yourself recommending often?
Good question. I've actually just finished reading a book called Do Hard Things. And I think the book itself is almost sort of redefining what is hard and what is not hard. Because I think it's very easy to be told by someone, this is a hard thing to do. And you just get told, it's hard to do that. But what is hard for one person is completely different for another person. And the author, a psychologist called Steve Magnus, is yeah, it's based in and around sport. I think because it's pretty easy to give examples of hard things and easy things in sport, and it's almost, yeah, it's just redefining how you look at things that may be hard, but actually you break it down and you say, like, what's the element of this that makes it hard, so you can make it, yes, it might still be hard, but it then becomes super achievable rather than being out of reach. I'd say that would be my sort of sports book that helps performance. But I like reading, but to be perfectly honest, I find it very difficult to read too many books that I have to think too much. I far prefer reading sort of a storybook. Yeah,
So
Matthew Riley would be my favorite author, who is it's very action adventure packed. But yeah, that will be in the camper van. There'll be lots of Matthew Riley books.
excellent, but do hard things I haven't heard of before, and that sounds like that's
Really
right.
good. He's also really good to follow on social media.
Oh, okay, brilliant.
He puts out some really good short, I don't even know what they're called, a series of pictures of some writing, and it is very thought-provoking.
Okay, brilliant, excellent. I will check that out. That's really good. Thank you for that. And then also for every episode, we get the previous guest to ask the next guest a question without knowing who that guest is. So you get a question from the legend of the triathlon world, the godfather of triathlon, Bob Babbitt. So Claire, have you got Bob's question?
Yep. So Bob Babbitt's question is there a quote that you live by?
Is there a quote that I live by? Yes, there is. And the quote that I live by is "Basics done well." It's not going to be rocket science. Just the simple things, do them as well as you possibly can. Professional footballers who get paid millions and millions of pounds a year practice passing the ball. The most simple skill that they can do, but they practice it. If it's good enough for them being paid millions of pounds a week, it's good enough for me. And that's something that I've sort of taken from my military days of, you've not necessarily got to be the best at everything, but if you can do the basics and you can do the basics better than anyone else, then you're going to, put yourself in the fight and give yourself the best possible chance.
I like
Brilliant. Excellent. I like that quote. Thank you. That's awesome. Right. Well, that has been a really brilliant episode. Thank you so much for coming onto the podcast, Tom. I'm really looking forward to watching your progress over the coming years, but particularly this year with the Bob Graham Round coming up. I'm going to be watching that very closely. I hope you enjoy the camper van and explore, spending lots of time in the Lake District. I suspect you're going to be seeing my coach up there a bit, are you? Will Clark. I understand you hang out with him a little bit, don't you?
Yeah, I know Will. He's in Loughborough, so yeah, we see each other quite a bit. We probably run past each other more than we run with each other, but I'll tell him, I'll send him your best. And oh no, crossing paths, I should say.
Good answer.
Very tactical answer. Excellent, Tom. No, it's been really good to chat to you. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a brilliant season ahead. If you want to find out more about Tom, the best place to go to is Instagram, where he is Tom Evans Ultra, or his Red Bull page, which I'll put in the show notes. So, what did you make of the interview with Tom?
It was great. It was really good to speak to an ultra runner again, because it's really good for us to kind of speak to so many different people. But also, I think for me to hear kind of how he got into ultra running and actually how he became a professional, and also the simplistic side to his training and what he does with data. So that for me, I think was really interesting. What about for you? The planning came up. I thought you'd quite like the planning part.
Oh, I love the planning part. We were singing off the same hymn sheet. I thought the way he mapped out clear goals and being very specific about those was right up my street. You know, whether it's ultra running, whether it's triathlon, whether it's business, whether it's getting fit or whatever it is, just that approach is so powerful. And I thought he described that really, really well in terms of kind of breaking it down. And, you know, if this is what the goal is, what have we got to do? And then, tying that in with the specific measurables in terms of the numbers. You know, this number is not important. I'm not going to measure that. This number is really important. I am going to measure that. I think knowing those key numbers is really good. I also thought he was very good at the marginal gains piece in terms of, right, I'm going to go and see this person for this person for this, this person for this. And, you know, whether it's sleep or whether it's nutrition or whatever it is, how can we get the best results?
And I think just having that team around you, and actually to hear an athlete, and actually I think with, you know, different people we've spoken to, we've heard different people working with different people, but he, you know, really talked about that team and using all those people for their skills. And again, it kind of brought me back into kind of how in the forces you have your team around you, and that is your support, isn't it? So I can see how all these things kind of knit together, and has kind of I guess kind of fed into where he is now and how he kind of performs.
Yeah, and I think also, so that planning is really brilliant at putting you in the best place to be able to win the race, but it's also brilliant in terms of giving you the confidence to actually be able to execute it, isn't it? It's all very well being, you know, the fittest man on the start line, but if you don't run the right race or execute the plan correctly, then it means nothing. And so actually it's the confidence to then go and do it well. I thought it was really, really interesting.
And I think having that plan, because it's all very well having a plan, isn't it? But actually practicing that as well. So executing it, yes, but practicing it and then refining it is a part of that. I'm sure you'll agree with that in your planning.
Well, do you know what? In the same way that you could tell that I was going to love his planning piece, I could tell that you were going to love that part of the nutrition plan of practicing it. And also, so I thought it was interesting when he said, you know, the goal is 100 grams of carb an hour. If I can't take this, then I've got to find a way of getting that 100 grams in a different route. So that intrigued me, actually. I didn't probe him at the time on it, but it was like, okay, so if you're not getting it in one way, it's still better to get it in at all as opposed to not getting something in.
And I think, you know, he's obviously got not just one plan for that, because that's how we work with people is, you know, you've got to have A, B, and C plan. And I'm sure, you know, there's a part to your planning in terms of, you know, not every plan goes to plan, does it? So what's your backup plan? And actually for those longer races, and you know that from racing as well, you know, always having a backup plan, because you might need to use it. As well.
It was also interesting that he said, you know, we didn't ask him specifically about what products he uses, but he referenced Morton and Red Bull as his primary fuel sources for one particular race. Whereas when I interviewed Beth Pascal, like right at the start of the podcast, she was all about kind of the more traditional ultra running gels, the spring energy ones. So quite different product, but interesting how they seem to work for him.
And I think that brings it back in, doesn't it, to what he was saying about whether that be training or nutrition or metrics, that you've got to find the practical part that works for you as an individual. Yes, we've got theory, we've got metrics, we've got the planning part, but that's all got to come together and work for you, hasn't it? So I really loved that kind of individualized approach, because at the end of the day, that gets him to where he needs to be with his style of training and planning.
Yeah, and you're right, it was very much bespoke to him, wasn't it? It was all about, this is what works for me, this is what we're going to work that out. It's not going to be, this is what should work in general. So and in fact it just occurred to me that his nutrition feels more like a triathlete's nutrition than a ultra runners' nutrition, but that could be because he hangs out with a lot of triathletes.
But it's also, I guess, what works for him, and I think that's the important thing, is that you can read a number of things, can't you, and you've got the theory there, but in practice, what is it practically that works for you? And his goal was to hit that 100 grams of carbohydrates an hour. So how do you do that? So that comes back to his planning, doesn't it, and how he's going to get there to meet his goal.
Yeah. I still also, what the other thing I think that we probably didn't play on enough, but what is incredible is how quickly and how at a relatively young age he absolutely became sensational in the ultra running world. To suddenly fly into the Western States and come in third, and then UTMB come in third. That's and to do so well in Marathon des Sables right from the off. I mean, that is pretty amazing, isn't it?
No, absolutely. And we didn't dive in enough, did we? But I think that mindset of maybe that's come from the forces as well.
Yeah. But also realizing that actually he was the fittest person on the sports field all along. So that is interesting, and it is. He said he worked the hardest, but also there might be some genetics in there as well to say that he was also naturally given the right sort of engine. No, really interesting conversation, really lovely guy, and I really hope that he can take the Bob Graham round record and bring it back to a Brit, because that would be really cool.
No, it'd be good to hear about that as well, how he does.
I think if he does that, he'll be he'd be worth his own chapter in Feet Above the Clouds. If there's ever a rewrite, although I know that Nikki Spinks really should have her own chapter in that as well. But very, very cool. And so let's hope he does that. Right, well, there's another episode done. Keep up the great training. I hope that's going well for you, Claire, and for everybody else, keep on training. And remember, this podcast was sponsored by 33 Fuel. So rethink your sports nutrition with 33 Fuel, award-winning natural sports nutrition for your performance, health, and a fitter future. It's the 33 Fuel Fuelosophy. Get yours at 33fuel.com, and if you use the discount code TRIBEathlon or the link in the show notes, you'll get a discount at the checkout. If you enjoyed this podcast, please do review it and share it, because it helps other people find what we think is really valuable learning lessons from amazing athletes. So please do that. You can also find the whole back catalogue at TRIBEathlon.com, and you can also find out about the TRIBEathlon app, which helps people find events, find people to train with, and enjoy their events through their tribe. So check out TRIBEathlon.com.